Amira, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Yes, thanks, Chris, for having me.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Amira Dhalla, and I work at Consumer Reports as the Director of Impact Partnerships and Programs with a focus on security and privacy.
And,
Um,
yeah, keep going.
I was going to tell you, yeah, so that is most of what I do. But in that realm, I organize programs like securityplanner.org, and I work on a lot of issues that consumers face that are directed towards any sort of privacy that they might have online. How can we advocate for that? How can we partner with organizations on better policies? As well as how do we tackle emerging technology issues that are often preying upon individuals who are on the cusps of these new technologies or really starting to engage in them.
Awesome. So, is there a story behind why you got into this field, or was this just the trajectory of your career?
I never knew that I was going to get into technology from the forefront. I think that was part of just the allure of somewhere where I could have like a place where I can make impact and really get into this technology field. And that was about 15 years ago. So I think many people at that point were like, what is this new internet? What are these new resources? Let's go play around. And I was definitely part of that group of people. And I found it really inspiring. I found there were so many opportunities to the web, to the tools, what we could develop and create. And within those 15 years, I actually spent 10 years really helping promote a more inclusive, safe internet and working on digital rights and literacy programs.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, I worked with about hundreds of thousands of community members in about 50 countries around the world. And when doing so, I learned that it wasn't enough for them to just come online and learn how to use these tools and the web, but they were actually scared for what happens when they are there. And in doing that, I really shifted my focus to work on privacy and security, specifically to address the problems that the communities I cared about had when they showed up in these spaces. And since then, it's kind of snowballed. I've done a lot of privacy and security, really gotten into cybersecurity to really understand consumers and users' play and part as it exists to make sure that we're all being able to be safer and maintain that security when we're using these platforms and tools that can have real opportunity in our lives.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things about the internet is this great place to find new things and access all sorts of stuff, but unfortunately, it can also be the quality of what you're connecting with may not always be what you hope it is, whether it's a product or a person or a service. It's always a little bit of a wild card when you're using the internet.
Yeah, and technology has emerged so quickly. There's so many things that are come evolved. I remember one of the first startups I worked at. We were the first ones in North America to create video on mobile devices,
Oh
and at
wow.
that time, it was not easy. There was a lot to do with creating videos because you had to optimize them for each operating system, and it was quite complex. And the moment we did it, we had streamed the Olympics. I think it was on AT&T, and that was we were all huddled around one phone watching it. And at that point, we were growing like slowly with technology, and now you're just seeing things like AI and cybersecurity boosting and booming at like a rate that is just unprecedented, and we couldn't even predicted.
Yeah, I don't think 20 years ago that I would have predicted people would live so much of their lives online, fully connected. I think everybody dreamed of the Dick Tracy watches, but no one would have expected accessing all the world's data from a device in the palm of your hand that weighs 4 ounces or something like that. I mean, it's really been an incredibly interesting time to be alive.
It is indeed.
And so I was curious about your kind of being an advocate of people, getting people online. What were some of those fears that people had when getting online?
Yeah, I remember in certain parts of the world where I would be working with groups of women and girls, and they felt that spaces were not safe for them, that they would get harassed and attacked, and that happened often. And in
Mhm.
other parts of the world, they were scared of losing money because there were all these different scams that happened where they were clicking on it and maybe had the literacy to join the web or join a program, but weren't aware of things like phishing. And at that point, we didn't even have words for it pretty clearly to know when a site might be malicious. And so people were like, I know this thing, and as much as I can connect with others, I'm going to lose money. And there's even this one time not that long ago where I was teaching a whole bunch of librarians in New York, actually at Brooklyn Public Library. And I was like, okay, everyone knows about phishing. Everyone knows not to click on these emails. And they were telling me just horror stories of different members of the community that were coming in and were losing large sums of money. And that were being hit with different scams and emails from people that were pretending to be relatives and sites that they thought that they were logging into, but giving away personal details. And that was just so common for them. And they were unequipped to actually process that or deal with it or support those communities.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of those interesting things is we've made it super easy for people to get online, the collective we, I guess. But there's not a whole lot of like your internet service provider doesn't come out and say, yeah, I'll keep you safe online. Your cable company doesn't I'll keep you safe online. It's kind of like, well, here's access, good luck has almost been kind of the way it's worked out for us, unfortunately. And so I was looking at the website that you guys have built, the securityplanner.org. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think it's a really neat way to look at security and figure out, well, what do I need to do, as opposed to, go online and try to figure out what I need to do.
Yeah, Security Planner has been around for a very long time, and Consumer Reports worked closely with the individuals who created it at Citizen Lab and brought it into our tool set a few years ago. And it is a free, easy to use guide to staying safer online. And there's so many great perks about it that I'd love to promote, but there's ways, there's specific things I'll highlight now for you, which is it's very personalized. So when you sign on to securityplanner.org, it asks you questions about which device you're using, what are the questions you have about your safety, and you get to customize what sort of recommendations. And then when you get to create a plan, it'll actually share with you what parts of that plan are most important, what are free, what are easy to use, what are accessible. And we're really creating a community of people being able to promote events and resources directly for those individuals. And one of my favorite actual facts about Security Planner is it's backed by an industry of experts. So we have lots of people from around the industry, not just Consumer Reports, who are talking with us every day, helping to advise us on what are the best recommendations, what are emerging threats, like memory safety and others that we need to be looking at so that we can create a better world for consumers and keep them out of risk harm. So there are so many features and assets to it, and it's updated regularly. And there's just so many ways in which we are continuously improving it to make sure that it is a tool that is like for the people, by the people, really addressing emerging threats and just anything you might need as it comes to the digital world.
Yeah, that's great that you have a resource that's constantly being kept up to date. It's one we were talking earlier. It's one of the most difficult things with producing content online about technology and privacy and security and even platforms, is that as these platforms change, all these resources that talk about the platforms and tell you how to use them have to also be updated on how to do what you need to do. I know you guys also just produced a cybersecurity and online privacy report. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So we just produced the Consumer Cyber Readiness Report with the Aspen Institute. And what it looks at is the behavior of consumers online as it relates to cybersecurity and data practices. Just to understand where are we in terms of evolution in the last few years. A lot has happened in the last few years as we think about it. I mean, amidst obviously the big one is the pandemic. But also the idea that breaches and data attacks and cybercrime have almost moved more mainstream. Some of that might be in like pop culture, so you can see the documentaries or the movies coming out. And then some of that is actually in just the advertising we're seeing or the media and the news. So people are advertising new products. The marketplace for VPNs is huge right now.
Yep.
You don't know which one to pick. So there's that. But then there's also, I was talking with someone recently. A bunch of schools in LA have just suffered a data breach over ransomware. And so, you think about these things and you're just hearing and seeing them more often. So the industry as a whole has exploded. And I don't think the pandemic is immune to that in terms of the factors which have really caused a lot of these things to come to light.
So was there anything in the report that surprised you in a good way of, because I know you've done some surveys for the report in the past. Are there areas of improvement that have really surprised you that like, wow, people are really learning to deal with things better?
Yeah, so we study actual behaviors of tools that people are using. And I will say the first thing that I was really impressed with and excited to see was that multi-factor authentication has dramatically increased in the last 3 years. So in our survey, we study where people are at in 2019 and then compare it with similar data that we collect in 2022. And so in 2019, people used roughly about I think it was like 60+% or 50% of multi-factor authentication. And in 2022, that number jumped to 77%. And I think that's like a multitude of factors.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like just phenomenal because that's one of the single greatest things you can do to protect yourself online and your accounts, especially if there's a data breach or cyber attack likewise. And so that's huge. And one of the things we point to in the report is that institutions are mandating it. Corporations are requiring and encouraging you to set up MFA. And so I think we're seeing this trend where it's like if a government or if it is the corporation are telling you to do these things, you're more likely to do it and understand what it is. And as a result, in the last 3 years, that just totally changed our behavior.
Mm-hmm. And there was one thing that kind of surprised me. I saw that the people claiming to use strong passwords was really high percentage, uppercase, lowercase, number signs, and special characters. I'm like, man, that number of people claiming to be using strong passwords seems surprisingly large, but hey, way to go. But I was really startled with how few people use password managers.
I think that's a good example of a space where people are overwhelmed. Password managers, because of all these things, are very helpful, and people are hearing that they're helpful. But what we hear often at Consumer Reports in the workshops and events that we throw is they're like, which password manager should I use? And there's just so many options for them to actually jump into and figure it out. And there's a little bit of like a technical barrier. So I think something like MFA, we're seeing skyrocket.
Mm-hmm.
And what our data showed in 2019 versus 2022, there is little to no change in how many more people use a password manager. And so some of that could be cost related. It costs money to use a password manager for the most part. Some of that could be overwhelming amount of choices. I think that's a really strong indicator of a space we as an industry need to look at and figure out how can we create better adoption in there.
Mm-hmm. I know Consumer Reports has their annual car buying guides and things like that, and appliances. Have you guys done a buying guide for password managers or VPNs?
Oh, we have. We do it annually. And we've got a great list online that anyone can search. And our members obviously get access to the detailed breakdown. But we do recommend LastPass as one of the best password managers. And we have a list of other ones that are prime and helpful for your security and rank them across the board.
And do you know offhand who your top VPN pick is?
We pick three. We usually iVPN, Mullvad, and I think the third was Mozilla's, which is like a white label version of Mullvad. Mm-hmm. And there might be one I'm missing in there, but those are definitely ones we recommend as being better on security.
Awesome. And one of the things that we were going to talk about was safe shopping. Consumer Reports has a 90-year history in helping consumers make good buying decisions. And with this episode airing, hopefully just before Black Friday and a peak shopping season, and people have been cooped up for the last 2 years with COVID and are looking forward to going out and doing their holiday shopping and Black Friday sales. How do we deal with shopping safe online and knowing, okay, is this a deal? Is this not a deal? Is this a legitimate retailer? Is it not a legitimate retail? Is this even a legitimate product or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many factors to understand when it comes to shopping online. It is a big time of year for a lot of people, whether you're shopping for yourself or shopping for others. And what we saw in the past years with the pandemic is it accelerated the amount people are going to shop online. And last year, we even saw tons of delays in products people were purchasing or them quickly out of stock, and Grinch bots were coming in. There were all these different factors. And so there are ways to protect yourself, but be warned and aware that it is a very key time for people to prey upon individuals who are looking for the best deal, who are looking for the items out of stock. And so what you have is a bunch of scammers coming in and really trying to optimize on you in those times. And while we often talk about it as being products that you sell and actual things that you're buying, it is not immune from charity scams. So the last year alone, like the FCC put out a warning about charity scams coming up really high in the time of both the pandemic. People were donating a lot, we're donating a lot more. And then a lot more phishing attacks were happening because of charity scams. And so I always like to include those together because it is not just what you buy, it is where you put your money. And so we do see a lot of those happen during the shopping times. And there's a bunch of things you can do to keep yourself safe. So it is not all loss. And it just means to be a smarter shopper in these times. And so there's tons of ways that I'm sure people who are listening to this often, and I hope already do, like using multi-factor authentication. We know you're using more of those. We know you're using stronger, better passwords. Making sure that your computer or your phones are up to date on the latest software developments. That's a really easy way to protect yourself against vulnerabilities and threats. People and organizations are often updating their sites and accounts and programs to make sure that these are immune, and not necessarily immune, but that they're at their best capabilities for any sort of threat that exists online. So that's those are the easy things you can do. And then I recommend those actually quite often, a lot of security things that people can do. But when it comes to shopping, keep your shopping on 1 or 2 credit cards. It makes it a lot easier for you to monitor what might be happening. So stay alert, monitor those accounts, keep them in 1 to 2 places. It makes it a lot easier. Use reputable brands. Make sure you're checking the sites when you buy them. I know a lot of people love to shop local. I do myself. But it is one of those times where you want to make sure that you're using sites that have taken the time to set up proper security measurements. Sometimes when you have a shop that's put up a site within a day, it's great for them. And I really encourage more shops to set up shops online, but make sure they take the time to have security that is up to date, and encouraging people to use MFA or strong passwords. And then before you pay, make sure there's encryption based on there. Some of the things you can do is check for HTTPS. It doesn't mean that it is a fully safe site, but it means that there is an added layer of security. And so those are some of the few things that one would do when they're shopping online. But also, it doesn't mean that you are totally immune and these things won't come out. So just be aware for phishing emails and scams. Know that if something is too good to be true, it often is. And there's tons of Grinch bots out there. Do you know the term Grinch bots?
I was going to ask you.
Okay.
I have not heard the phrase Grinch bot, and I was writing it down previously in my notes. What in the world is a Grinch bot?
Okay.
I know what like an auction sniper is, but that's so 1990.
Well, I mean, I think they were built off that. So Grinch bots, I think, is just like a good word, but it is the official name, I promise. So bots were short for software robots,
Mhm.
and they're applications that automatically make purchases on the internet. And so they have some good use cases, but more often than not, they're probably the people or they're the bots that are snatching up all the concert tickets and then having them resale for much higher prices. So you see these on eBay or Craigslist or other sorts of places where they're then doing huge markups. And so, they take from traditional marketplace and then they try selling them elsewhere. And the reason I specifically know a lot more about this is because CR has been urging senators and representatives to legislate against Grinch bots for the last year, really knowing that this poses an issue for consumers. And the reason it's so big and such an issue in terms of our cybersecurity is because once you go to these third-party sites, you no longer can verify if it's reputable. So what you get is a lot of scams going on there,
Yeah.
and a lot of places that pop up that are like, we have these for sale, and it makes it very confusing for the average person to know what is going on.
So I'll date myself. I'll use a really old example. So when the Beanie Babies were popular, yeah, you can buy almost none of them at
Yeah.
the standard retail establishment, but there's all these little Beanie Baby pop-ups at fairs and online where they claim to have the super rare ones,
Yeah.
yet they're, hand sewn ones end up showing up in your mail.
I remember that. And I also bought fake Beanie Babies in those moments in my time of collecting them. But yeah, those are literally what a lot of the sites are doing online now. And while some of them are reputable and they sell for extremely high prices, some of them are actually quite fake. And, obviously you don't want fake products for yourself or for anyone else. But a lot of them are also scams. And that's where you have to be careful. And it's kind of hard to judge whether it is a reputable site anymore because there's all these third parties. So
Yeah.
instead of buying something on the original authenticated site, you're forced to go somewhere else, which means you need to be aware of the phishing sites and emails you might be getting from it as a result.
Yeah, it used to be that you could tell people if it's HTTPS, you're fine. It's a legitimate organization. But now with the certificates basically free,
Yeah.
that really only means your communication is encrypted. It doesn't mean that you're really dealing with the entity that you think you're dealing with, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're even a legitimate entity.
Yeah. It's hard.
So what would be some of the signs of a fake website or illegitimate store that you might find?
Yeah, I mean, it might look very similar to a store And so I would look for ones that potentially are saying they're a store and then maybe go straight to the URL that or searching them online. I would look for HTTPS, making sure that S is added at the end. Or like stores are often unfamiliar addresses or domains. So it might be instead of a .com, like a .ev. So you look out for those type of things. And they often ask when they're scam related, they often ask for personal details or account information right away.
Mm-hmm.
So they might send it in an email or other sorts of places, but they just want to get your PII, your personal information, as quickly as possible. Oftentimes, if they are trying to replicate a reputable site, they're using like an old logo or brand. So if you love that brand or site, make sure you're up to date on their branding. And then often it's really interesting to me because a lot of them contain bad grammar or spelling.
Yeah.
And so I find that that's like usually a tip off for me, or they contain errors with some sort of the account or something about my name. And so a lot of them have immediacy to them. So they want you to get to do something right away. They want you to like fill out something to like claim this added prize to your thing that makes it seem so much better than others. And those are the things that I look out for when I'm on these sites. And I make sure that something feels great. Do they ask you if it's encrypted? Do they say they're storing your information? I know not many people read privacy policies, but it's good to get into the habit of skimming those to understand what they're going to do with your data. There's great tools to understand just even how you're going to be tracked on those sites. What are they taking from you? Every time you're inputting information, every time you're getting to a site or adding, like searching a specific thing, they're tracking and using all of that.
Yeah, and I suppose with any sites, always be cautious about what data they're asking for. Like, why do you need to know this piece of information?
Red
If
flags all around.
yeah, if I'm, we'll keep with the Baby example. Sorry for anyone who's under 40. You probably have no idea what a Beanie Baby is. Uh, but if they're asking you for your date of birth in order for you to buy one, that should be a red flag. If they're asking for stuff that's not relevant for the service that they're providing.
Yeah. And I always I do a lot of education and teaching. And so when we talk about, strong passwords or security questions, they often kind of like they literally fish for what might be your questions. Like, what's your dog's name? What's your maiden name? Or something of that sort. Those are all common security questions. And those are places you don't need to be adding those info.
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of people, they use their password managers to store fake answers to the security questions specific to the site that they're on. So if their bank
Yep.
asks them for what their mother's maiden name is as part of their, not the account creation or the identity verification portion, but just the security, that they put something, blue.
Yeah.
And when that question is asked on a different platform, it's telephoto lens. I don't know, we're making up things, or just the standard 32 characters spit out by a password manager as a way to kind of keep that security, and not knowing whether or not, if it's not a legitimate site, I don't need to be providing a legitimate answer to a security question to someone who doesn't need to know that real question.
Yeah. And this is why password managers are great. We just need to change the dial on people adopting them more.
Yep. And so you also mentioned during this time of the year charity scams and the propensity for us to give during the end of the year. Let's touch on that for a few minutes before we close out, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
What should we be watching out for in terms of charity scams and being able to figure out a real charity from a fake one, or a real representative versus a fake representative?
Yeah. And I think I'm glad you're focusing on this because I think this one often gets forgotten in our holiday shopping or holiday times. But it is a time when a lot of organizations, particularly nonprofits or others, are asking for donations. It is a huge fundraising time for them. And I want nonprofits and organizations to continue. I appreciate people donating to them. I do it myself. But every time when we're online at a specific moment, the fishers will come. So if they know you're more likely to enter in your credit card information to make a donation to an organization in this time, they will come in this time to make sure that they're sending you emails. And so I would say when you are doing this, use some of the same advice we used for looking at an actual site or store to make sure it seems legitimate. If you want to donate to a charity or an organization, enter their URL directly. And if you don't know their URL, search it online. You're most likely, from one of your search engines, be taken to it in the top search. And you can do it directly from there. But be wary that specifically in the last couple of years during the pandemic, there have been more charity scams because people are more likely to donate, whether they had extra funding or they were more inclined to in a time when there are many things happening in the world, that people are coming into their inbox. So more often than not, it's usually an email. Never click on an email that asks you to enter your credit card information right away or as urgency. Same sort of recommendations. Go to the site directly.
Yeah, yeah. That's always been my approach. If someone is coming to my door or meeting me outside of a grocery store or an email or a phone call, it's I only give when I have control of who I'm communicating with. If someone approaches me, they very well could be a legitimate representative of the company, but my personal opinion is I just don't deal with people directly in this. I initiated the contact because
Yeah.
I don't want to have to figure out how to vet you or vet the person outside the store or figure out, well, is this person really calling from the Red Cross? It's just a lot easier for me to go to the Red Cross, go to the charities that I want to give to directly and give there and not wait for, not necessarily be responding to whether it's legitimate marketing for the charity or phishing emails. That way, I'm in control of the conversation. I'm in control of how much I give and when I give, and making sure that I'm giving to the causes that I support and care about.
Yeah, and the charities, nonprofits, the organizations, they appreciate that for sure.
And I guess we can always use Charity Navigator to. So there's a couple websites, Charity Navigator, and I can't think of the other one off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Yeah, Charity Navigator has direct links to the charity organizations. I mean, they're good for assessments if you're wanting to look at a charity
Yeah.
or nonprofit and kind of understand where you're donating your money to or searching for different communities or groups or issues. So it can generally be very helpful to go. And I do trust them as a reputable site to have the links that go directly to those organizations.
And the other one is Charity Watch.
Charity Watch. Okay.
Yeah. So both of those will provide links to the actual charities. Because sometimes I've seen you search for a charity and an ad comes up that looks like it might be the charity, but it might not be the charity. No one would ever put up a scammy ad.
No. And honestly, all that is organizations collecting your data and then using it to track you across the web. And so I'm pro moving away from that process altogether and showing people we don't necessarily need those ads to do the things we want to do.
I love that. Are there any additional resources or things you want to add before we close out today?
I would say even for your shopping and holiday needs, for new devices or systems or tools that you're using in your homes, securityplanner.org has tons of resources. Some fun ones in terms of what we've just updated there is how to delete and find old accounts. That is critical. Scammers and other sorts of organizations, they're taking your data from those things and they're using them against you. I know a lot of you don't remember that you had a Foursquare account, but you did. Or other sorts of accounts that are still out there that are really still using your data in ways that you might not want them to. All of this and more is in securityplanner.org. So I really just encourage people to check that out.
Yeah, it's a really, really great resource. I've had an opportunity to play around with it. We'll absolutely be linking it in the show notes as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris.
Amira, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Thank you.